Welcome to the Why Isn't It Working? Business and Tech podcast, talking all things business and tech in the emerging and enterprise space. Here are your hosts, Karl Wood and Michael Hamilton.
Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today we have Greg Collocott, who's an enterprise Agile coach. How are you today, Greg?
Hey, thanks, Mike. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Awesome. And hello, Karl, as usual, my partner in crime.
Hey, Michael. How are you, mate?
Very good. Well, let's kick off, Karl, and let's get the first question firing off.
Let's kick into it. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. Quite a long and illustrious career. You've done a bit of globe trotting from the UK, South Africa, back to Australia. So tell us a little about your career and how you ended up where you are now. Sure,
Carl. Yeah, so interesting journey, but to try and keep it short and colourful, decided to go to the UK as a starting point in the career. It's a good place to really learn a lot, and really got engulfed in the whole banking career side there. Loved the development side of life, so I was a deep technical guy at that point. And hadn't really thought too much further than writing the best code and coming up with the best applications, right? Kind of from there, realized that I had skills with people and started moving into, project management, a bit of infrastructure side, some deep technical sort of management things. Got very interested in the financial markets, obviously because of London being 100 plus banks, the center of the universe, really, that's how you feel when you're there. It was a very exciting place to be, and spent just over a decade or more, living what I would say is a very demanding lifestyle in London, trying to meet that daily, sort of adrenaline rush that you get on being on trading floors, right? It was good fun. Then GFC came along. That kind of changed everything, turned the world upside down. And I figured out maybe I should find out more about this risk and compliance thing. It seems quite important. So moved over and started doing some regulatory and compliance work. And at the same time began working for Barclays, which is a global bank from the UK, but they also had a huge presence in Africa. And I went in and did quite a significant piece of work for them over the sort of period of 4 or 5 years. Actually a 6-year stint overall, changing up their treasury stack across 12 countries or so. And that proved very, very insightful into how leadership teams alter the way we do things, right? And with all that behind me, I figured a good time to move to Oz, and always wanted to come down here. And with that, changed into coaching because I figured I could apply all that hardcore financial background and senior management experience and career into coaching and help teams and specifically executives get a better handle on how to do things in a far more constructive way. That's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And now moving in, I guess, to the agility sector, this is something that we've sort of seen dominate, I guess, the coaching landscape in the past 5 years. And I mean, from your mind, Greg, what makes, a really good and successful agile coach, that can get in there and get things done?
Carl, I think that's a difficult question, but I think the easy answer to that is you have to apply some pragmatism to what you do. If you're too much of a purist, you are going to be frustrated. You are also going to potentially implement the wrong way of working in what looks like the right place to do it, and shortly or maybe further down the line, depending on how well it goes for you. You could trip up and disappoint a bunch of people. So I think a good coach is someone who can assess the landscape, pick bits and pieces of what really makes sense, and try and block it together in the best way possible.
For a lot of large enterprises, there's this big obsession with kind of making the best team, sort of grabbing a bunch of superstars and throwing them together. Now, I've always sort of been liking, IT delivery to kind of like a sports team in that sometimes, you don't always need the best individual people together because they're notoriously difficult and ego-driven to work with each other to get a result. Do you kind of agree with that in a way? Do you think sometimes you need a really diverse mix of people in order to make a great team?
Yes, you do, definitely. If you put too many superstars together, it's like having all the best quarterbacks in the team, right? It's that everybody's going to want the ball at the same time, and it's not going to work. You need a good mix of people who have soft skills, people who have technical skills, people who have business understanding, right? A business understanding element in the team is critical, and then you need some fun in the team as well. If it's all too hardcore and too focused on deliver, you're going to burn people out very quickly, and those superstars will soon become the standing on the sideline.
What have you found? So, what have you found actually when rolling out Agile has been the major challenge? Is it more of an IT process problem when you're rolling it out, or the business side of it? What have you found has been the biggest challenge when rolling it out?
I think the biggest challenge, Mike, is probably the lack of adequate change management, right? So kind of what happens is someone tells a story. It lands up on some business desk somewhere. Hey, we should do this Agile thing. That we're going to be much better in the market. Whatever the sales pitch is, internally or externally, and pretty much most people leap on it because they hear two things, right? They hear quicker and cheaper, right? Now that's just, yes, I understand why they would say that, but honestly, the bottom line is Agile isn't cheaper. Right? It's just the same cost. You have the same number of people there. You have the same people working on the same systems, the same licensing requirements. Tell me where this is getting cheaper at the moment. And the quicker element is you're still delivering this big thing, but the quicker part of it, and this is the misconstrued piece, the quicker part of it is you get to see value quicker. So you get to see smaller increments of the bigger thing, but much faster. But unfortunately, a lot of people latch on to, hey, we're going to get everything we want much quicker and half the price, right?
And do you feel that Agile implementations have come at the expense of good planning sometimes, more strategic planning? Or what's your thoughts on that? I know there's different opinions on the market about that.
Yeah, I'm going to be careful with what I say with that, Mike, because a lot of people think that they do good planning. And sadly, what they do is they kind of throw the common sense out the window. And they sort of smash it down, and they think, Agile planning is taking the big plan and breaking it down to lots of small little plans and then doing it, right? That's not Agile. That's little plans. So you still need strategy days. You still need to think about things clearly. You've got to have a clear direction and a roadmap, right? And an Agile portfolio roadmap is so critical, and it's got to be understood by the leaders, not only, them. And they've got to get that messaging right down to the teams. Give people a value and a purpose to come to work every day. What am I driving for? What's my next horizon goal that I'm hitting? Right?
Do you think sometimes, Greg, that there's probably too much emphasis placed on the technical side of things as opposed to the human element? Like a lot of the things I read about today, whether I'm trawling LinkedIn or other popular medium for the sector, is a lot of it's focused on things like DevOps, DevSecOps, and it's very technical focused, but I feel like sometimes we're going down a path where we throw technology first and, not the people first when it comes to sort of, bringing people up to speed.
Yeah. So jumping in the technology bucket first, not that I like using a tool to solve a problem, but I have been known to use that before, right? To demonstrate how it could change things, right? Sometimes it's easier to do that. But people get carried away, and they think the tool is going to fix everything for them and make them all agile. You've got to be careful on that. Making people agile is a very tricky, difficult thing. And sometimes you need to demonstrate how it could be different, and using a tool is an awesome way of doing that. However, you've actually got to park that conversation and clearly understand that the ultimate goal here is to change the way people work every day. And doing that is changing people's behaviors. Now, changing people's behaviors, we all know, is a very difficult thing, right? It's reconstructing what you've been built to do for the last 15, 20 years of your life, right?
And so what are some of the techniques that you use to sort of cope with that resistance? Because I think you've hit a really good point there, Greg, which is fundamentally people don't want to change, right? Whether it's work or their home life, people get into a certain comfort zone. But I mean, nowadays the world's faster than ever, and we've kind of got to change. So when you get that resistance, what are some of the techniques you have to use to help people overcome that?
Some of the easier things to do is you've actually got to gain some comfort zone discussions where you find out where someone's comfort zone is, and then you actually alter that to say, what would it look like if we had to experiment and do something slightly different, and would that make your comfort zone better or worse, right? Now, your comfort zone is something that, especially at the more senior leaders, they've arrived where they are without you being in the room. So the question is, why should I change what I've done so far? It's worked for me, right? And really what you've got to try and demonstrate is, if you experiment and try a few things and it actually works better and you lead by example, you could change your team's culture. And it's the culture thing that the leader really generates and changes, right? The culture drives the behavior, and that's underpinned by the tools and technology and everything else.
And leading on to that culture conversation is, some organizations are probably not suited to a purist agile approach, as you would imagine. We talk about it a lot in the industry, especially in the media. Do you honestly believe there's a mix of agile planning waterfall planning with agile execution is suitable for some companies based on their culture versus a more purist approach?
Yeah, I do, Mike. It's if you look at most of the big companies out there today, there are very few of them that have been brought up, startup to where they are today on an agile culture, right? They all have this sort of legacy. We do things by the book culture, and by the book means, it's linear, it's waterfall, it's process driven, process heavy, often technology tool driven, and to change that thinking and to start doing things in a more agile type way, it's tricky. So you have to come up with a blend, and you've got to figure out what that blend is, and it's not the same cookie cutter blend for everywhere, right? So if you go from one institution to another, even though they look the same on the outside and they sound the same and they seem to do the same things, internally they don't, because fundamentally there are some different things happening inside there, and they come down to the people.
So customize the strategy. So have a strategy and look at your workforce, look at the culture of the people, and actually customize something that's what they need to adopt or roll out agile processes. Is that the best way to go about it? Or
you've actually touched on something there. So it's speak to the people. Ask the people that you're going to be working with what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And I know it sounds painful, and it doesn't have to be painful, but at the same time, if you don't have that conversation, the workforce that you look at just feels like it's another thing being implemented on them, and they're not part of it. And if they're not part of that change, the behavior behind it is going to be driven by a different element or incentive, right?
And the reason why I ask that is because last 15 years, I've had a lot of conversations, Karl and I do also, with other guests. And what I've noticed is some people, some organizations focus on the process of Agile instead of the business outcome, and don't realize maybe they are slipping and not addressing their business needs sometimes, and they're going slower than they did with Waterfall. Is that something you've seen across the board in general, or have conversations about?
There are lots of good organizations that are busy changing their thinking around heading towards outcomes, right? What I really struggle and work hard to try and do is get them to think that an outcome is something different to just renaming a milestone, right? A delivery milestone is not an outcome. That's still a milestone, and that's still applicable to agility, right? But an outcome is where we're looking at it from the end result, from your customer, be it an internal customer or an external customer. What does that feel like to them? So if you're looking at me and you're selling me, a box of soap, how is my experience different from what it was yesterday if you do this new thing, right?
There's some cases where I guess, and this kind of gets to the uncomfortable territory where you have sections of the workforce that simply aren't willing to adapt or are too resistant and potentially need to be reevaluated, to put it, I guess, politically correctly as well.
Yeah. In the nicest way possible, when I do hit an absolute stumbling roadblock and, I get to the point, and I have done this before, I do literally sit a couple of people down and I just say to them, you've asked me to come help you, right? You are not willing to change. You're not demonstrating that leadership or that ability to change, or the mindset to want to learn something new, right? maybe you're actually better off placed where you are, and I'll walk away and I'll go help someone else who actually really wants to change. Now, sometimes that does spark a bit of a retaliation, but sometimes it actually sparks the right thinking and actually clicks people over just where they needed to go to start thinking, hey, maybe I'm actually not doing as good a job as I thought I was, to become more agile. Maybe I'm still thinking my old way and trying to just do it by calling it agile.
One of the big common themes that we had, I guess, coming through this year on the podcast was soft skills. So obviously, within an agile transformation, a lot of the time it's been applied traditionally on the IT side, but we're now seeing it applied in different areas like HR, finance, and other sectors as well. But rolling back to it, the big area of soft skills is being able to communicate. I mean, we find that those people are often more open to change as well. I mean, do you find that as well? You get a lot of people who can actually articulate quite well what they're doing, and they're more than often happier to jump on the train for that journey?
Yeah, so having someone who gets it and can speak to it is really critical, right? To your example, on both business and technical side, there are a lot of people who don't, right? And sadly, it's not because they don't want to try, it's just because they just simply don't, right? It's not in their job description, it's not in their makeup. And just like I might be good at cycling, but I'm not particularly good at swimming. It's one of those things, right? I can try really hard to be good at swimming, but it's not going to change. I can still be good at cycling. And it's the same thing with the soft skill element, right? You actually sometimes need to call experts in who can help you do that piece of work for you and actually make that transition happen, right? But you've actually got to have the right people in place who get both sides of the challenge.
And with that in mind, also, when we're talking about implementing Agile, like you've even got Kanban, and sometimes I know those words are interchangeable and does confuse some people, but are you more about using the software to drive the process change, or still go to traditional boards on the wall with post-it notes to implement that type of Agile change with the right Scrum Masters across the organization? What's your best of breed approach? Yeah.
So, Mike, the best option there is to actually speak to the team first, right? If they are a highly technical team, I would probably use some sort of software. If they're a more business aligned team, I would more than likely use some sort of post-it note, Kanban board, physical medium, right? That said, some of the more business focused teams might be happier just running it on a spreadsheet. So that's what I'm saying. You've actually got to ask them, how do you currently work? How would it feel if you did this thing? And how would it feel if you did it in this way or that way? And give them a choice and sometimes demonstrate it to them, right? Now, a lot of the business teams, no disrespect to them. Sometimes technical stuff just goes right over their head and rightly so. And the same applies to the technical teams, right? A lot of the business jargon and just general business language, they just don't get because it doesn't apply to their daily thinking. So if you gelling those two types of teams, which is ultimately what you want to really try and do, you've got to find a happy place for them both to work on, right? So sometimes that means actually having physical and software at the same time.
It almost sounds like you're a bit of a relationship manager there as well, Greg. I mean, when it comes to, I guess that's one thing that we've also seen, right? You've kind of got a level of content between both sides where the business doesn't really, treat IT seriously or like IT because maybe failed deliveries in the past. And conversely, IT's, got no respect for the business in the way it should. So it's almost like you're sort of coming in and trying to meld those two back together to form a cohesive goal as well.
Yeah. If you have the time, that's the best place to start, is by joining those two and getting one team up and running. If you don't have the time, you're going to have to hit those challenges one at a time, and you're going to have to figure out which the most important ones are to really try and resolve, because there could be many, and you could waste a lot of time trying to do things that will just never change.
One of the big things also seems to be the lack of a very clearly defined end goal. And a lot of the time you walk into a project and everyone's kind of doing their own little things which are contributing to a project. But if you were to sit everyone down and say, okay, tell me in plain English, what's the point of this project? I think you'd probably get a lot of different answers. So is that a big theme as part of proper, agility training to make people understand that there is a core goal that we are all working towards?
Yeah. So that's exactly one of the key things around when we talk about an outcome, generate at the top level, what is the ultimate outcome? What are we going to be doing? And it's almost like the purpose that we, why we exist and why we come to work. it could be related to, in traditional thinking, what is the company strategy? So sometimes you join a company and they go, tell us what our 3 main strategy pillars are for the next year, whatever it is, right? The majority of people in a company often can't answer that question very well, and they won't admit it, and the company won't admit it. But if you actually go in there and you sit under the covers, you realize that a lot of people don't really know what this year's strategy is. And it's exactly the same thing applies to a project or a program portfolio. If your leader or sponsor hasn't clearly articulated that at the top level, and that hasn't been broken down, right, decomposed into the right sets of outcomes to be handed out to different teams, the challenge is going to be exactly the same. You're going to have a bunch of people pitching up. They don't know why they're there. They're doing little increments of work, but they can't see the holistic big picture, and that's the challenge.
And when you're looking and training and working with executives, right, and obviously being one yourself, it helps in your history and your career. What are the common themes you're hearing from them about challenges of starting Agile or getting a strategy moving? Is there any key themes?
Yeah, again, it's been oversimplified. And I'm not going to dive into specific methods right now, but it's been oversimplified. Some of the methods in the market oversimplify the concept, and you apply some training, you bring that back to home, and the executives then get frustrated that this thing hasn't happened much quicker than what they thought it would. And that ultimately comes down to, you can't do this in isolation. If you're going to do it, a bunch of you need to do it together. And you need to be eye to eye on what that outcome is and how you're going to interact with each other. And that's almost what, when I talk about my personal manual, how to run me, and then my training manual of how to run a team, right? And then the cohesive manual around how to run a business unit. Those 3 things need to align, because if my personal manual is not an extract out of one of those other 2, then I'm going to be an outlier, and I'm going to be frustrated because I'm expecting things to happen and no one's doing it my way. And why is that? I've had the training, my team's had the training. We all know what to do. We're going to a stand-up every day. We're doing all these things, but just, the rest of the team isn't playing ball. What's going on? And that is because of this non-connectedness.
Do you have any, I guess the best way to sort of prescribe this would be, I guess, people that you look up to who are kind of, pioneers in the field, any sort of people as trailblazers that you look up to that sort of pioneered, the Agile way of working and thinking as well?
Yeah, it's going to be the usual suspects, I'm afraid. It's there's going to be no massive surprises here, but I'm going to call out people who don't traditionally jump into the Agilist buckets, like Steve Jobs, for example, right? You didn't hear a single word of Agile there, but that is the business agility at its best, right? There's someone who was super demanding, but also super personal. He was personal at the right moments, but way over demanding sometimes. So he didn't have the best method, but he certainly built a great culture, right? If you think about that, underpinning that was actually some coaching, right? Same if you look at where the likes of SAFe, for example, has come from as a methodology. If you look at the likes of Scrum, those sort of things, those guys have championed agility to the best way possible, is in terms of boxing it up and scaling it at speed, which is great, right? The downside from that, and this is where a lot of our conversation today has been around, is the downside from that is buying boxes of agility and just dumping it into your organization doesn't necessarily convert you. You're not going to transform or change because I've implemented 6 new teams, right? It's not going to happen. So you need actually a combination of someone like a Steve Jobs, right, who's super demanding but also very smart about how they do things, and then you need someone who can describe a process, roles, responsibilities, and how to implement it very well, and put it in Dean left and right, awesome, right? So take that, mix it with the right business management, put it in, you can get something happening. If your organization matches that sort of methodology, right? I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. Same with Scrum, same with just general blends. A lot of big financial organizations or corporates blend their own, and they come up with their own versions of it. That's actually what we should be doing.
So a hybrid model, and with the personality of the organization embedded in the strategy, with the culture, of course, in that. So you're finding, look, because I know, look, I do assimilate Agile, successful Agile with startups, as we've seen in the unicorns that have come from, Silicon Valley and so forth. And you mentioned Apple before. So a lot of new teams with fresh people. But when you're taking workforces and converting them over, can that sometimes be the problem? Sometimes they just shouldn't have gone down that rabbit hole. And what I mean by that is maybe regulation programs. Sometimes they should stay in waterfall because they're just very efficient at delivering in waterfall, and we can't risk it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so you can definitely do it. You can definitely change teams, right? But it's a time thing. So, I've just been working in the last couple of years working on doing something in that regulatory space, which has been a significant change, but it is by far and wide not this massive step from 0 to 5, right? It's tiny baby steps, and it takes time, right? We're talking about years, right? We're not talking about weeks or months to get your direction changed, to get all the people on board, to change the culture of how they work, to support that with new learning development pathways, new software, new process. This is not something you can just say, hey, by March we're going to get this done. With all the will in the world and all the money in the world, it's not going to happen.
So start with a digital project maybe sometimes, or a low profile project, nothing mission critical, really. That's a good start. And then use that as a use case maybe, or a case study.
Mike, if you think about it like this, I spent a lot of my life in finance in the banks, right? And a lot of the banks are looking at the new startups that are appearing. I'm not going to mention names, but big guys looking at little guys wondering how are they so I don't want to use the word agile, but how can they respond so quickly and meet their demand of their customer or the regulator so quickly, right? And they can do that because they're small. Literally, they are literally small. There's a couple of hundred people, maybe a couple of thousand people, but they're small. They're not these huge companies with 50, 60, 100,000 people in, right? That's a different thing. So to your point, what you want to do is if you're a large organization like that, you actually want to choose pockets where it makes sense, go in there and change those pockets. Have very clear change management around how the rest of the organization is going to deal with this new pocket of change, and work on that and see where the culture best moves next.
One of the things, just to touch back on, I guess, and we mentioned Steve Jobs and Apple before, and there's multiple other companies we could probably rattle off, as well as the charismatic leaders, I guess. So one of the core themes around agility is kind of more of that flatline, management structure, and encouraging everyone to sort of, contribute in a positive way in the way they can. But is there also something to be said then about that cult of personality, someone who is a strong leader? I mean, is there still space for that? Because if we look at a lot of the examples, and I know if I look at examples, I have like Clarence Kelly, who was head of Lockheed Martin, who was an amazing engineer who drove that whole process. Do we still need those kind of charismatic guys really as our champions?
You absolutely do. And you've got to have guys who are a little bit wacky, a little bit off the edge. Maybe not at work, but in their personal lives, depending, look at Elon Musk, right? I mean, that guy just does amazing stuff all the time, right? It's because they prepare to experiment and throw it all out there and just give it a go. And if it fails, put their hand up and say, hey, it failed, and we'll try something else, right? It's having that attitude that also allows everybody below you to breathe a bit, and also be able to expect to be able to make failure and make failure work by learning from failure, right? So failure is not a bad thing. Failure is actually a good thing. It's how we learn, right? So, it's, if you've got children, when you have little guys running around the house, they bump their head a lot, but they only do it a couple of times and then they stop bumping their head, right? It's one of those things. And it's exactly the same principles apply when you're older. Just the head that you're bumping is just, it's a financial thing, right? So you either doing really well and everybody loves you, or you're doing really badly and the market's looking at you going, oh, you failure, right? And it's the ability to drive through that and support all your leaders who are helping you do that in saying, it's okay, we'll do better next time, right?
The average, I guess, lifespan of a CEO in Australia is around 2 to 3 years, dependent on, your industry vertical. So do you think that short span also contributes to a lot of these organizations potentially starting, an agility journey and then it sort of petering off afterwards when a new change of management comes in and it's ramped back up again? Have you seen examples of that happening as well?
Yeah, this is one of my little bugbears at the moment. It's no one's actually in place long enough to complete something. So there's an old saying in agility, stop starting so many things and start finishing. And it's exactly the same problem. It's like everybody keeps coming in with a new, fresh idea, and very few people actually see through the previous one that was going. Right? It's like, okay, let's stop that now. We've done enough of that. Let's move on to my new one. My idea is much better. Which is, it's how we iterate. It's how we move. But what I do actually think is, as an industry, just in general, we should have smaller projects. We should stop fooling ourselves and having these big multi-year $50 million, $100 million, whatever they are, size projects that we're going to promise some big change in the future, 2-3 years down the line. What we should have is small quarterly projects. Do the best you can in 3 months, 90 days, and plan everything in 90-day increments, right? And if we do that, things will change. Things will significantly change because the outcomes are so much more manageable and determinable.
Do you think it's also caused a problem because now, especially in the tech sector, that we're expecting people to do more roles? Like, I look at people and they ask for a full stack engineer. I'm like, well, okay, you want someone to build your website, your middleware, and your database for one person. So they're going to be sort of spread across 3 things. So you're going to throw 3 levels of features at them that they're going to struggle then to, manage. So do you think that's a problem as well? A lot of the time we ask too much of people and then, like you said, we're not finishing anything. We're simply moving from task to task and nothing's been completed properly.
Karl, it's evolution. If you go back to when I started coding, you did everything, right? If you look at what's happened, the industry has gone super specialized, and now they're coming back to what everybody calls T-shaped skills and 3-shaped skills and all the rest of it, where we're trying to say, well, actually, you shouldn't just be able to do this one thing. You should be able to do at least these other 2 or 3 things as well, right? And going back to where I started out, I had to do everything. I literally built the server that I did coding on, and then afterwards, I delivered it and went and supported it and spoke to. It's the whole thing end to end, and it's finding a magic mix between, in the super complex world we are today, with the gazillion of different options that we have to deliver any kind of software or hardware implementation to meet the client's needs, and at the same time, being able to have an holistic view of what that thing looks like end to end and get everybody on the same journey and the same page and still keep the customer happy. Hey, this is going to be a challenge that's not going away.
And you're finding, when I look at the actual business implementation for business departments like finance that implement Agile, and then you've got IT teams that do it, I'm finding that there has been a technology or a quality debt that's built up over time because of moving so fast. For example, in IT, you might bypass good design practices and maybe some testing, but then let the development take more of the center stage because there's more developers in the Scrum team. Have you seen that type of behavior going on across Agile departments or in teams, that the quality has been diminished of the output?
I'll answer that in a different way. It's actually getting the right roles and right responsibilities set up in the team to start with. Too many times we fall into the trap of just assuming that these things are covered, and sometimes your superstars in the team step up and they try to take these roles and inadvertently skew what we should do to kind of meet other requirements, and sometimes your outcome or your customers is a bit disappointed, right? So does that answer your question, Mike?
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, it does actually, because like sometimes the Scrum Masters or the leaders of the teams are in there to move faster, but sometimes they're moving so fast they're not aware of the quality that's been diminished and sometimes put at risk to the company.
Yep.
And as a result, you build up this massive quality debt that's in production or creating a risk in production at a later future date, especially in regulation-based industries. When things go in there, like little reporting things, and so forth, when superannuation. But that is some of the things I've noticed that Agile can introduce.
There's the whole concept of everybody's leaning on automation now, right? So DevOps and DevSec, everything is going on, and it's really interesting. And again, it's it's how we scale. It's, to answer Carl's point, it's how we do more roles as one person, right? You automate all the roles that you don't want to do, right? Why not? Makes more sense. It frees me up to do the things I want. I actually am passionate about doing, but at the same time, it generates a whole new dimension of opportunity for people who want to do automation. So, in automating someone's role, you actually create a new role for someone to create automation, which is really great. I like that.
So it's around sort of, bringing more of a capability and almost helping a career path for that person as opposed to replacing them purely.
Yeah. If you think about it today, my kids who are busy, hopefully at some stage going to finish university, they're going to have 5 or 6 careers, maybe more, right? They're definitely going to have multiple jobs, sometimes simultaneously, right? And that's a difficult concept, for someone, a lot of people our age, my age, to get their heads around is how do you have 2 roles at the same time? Surely that's conflict of interest, or how can I work for 2 companies? And these guys are going to do that, and they're going to thrive doing that, because it's going to be, hey, I work 3 days a week for these guys and 2 days a week for these guys, and these 2 different roles sound different and they interlock, but they actually keep me mentally balanced and interested in what I'm doing, right?
Absolutely. Well, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today, and it's been really interesting hearing your insights on, the Agile way of working and your experience, I guess, not only as a coach, but also a mentor in this sector for people across the board. I guess for anyone who's listening in regards to, looking at this as a career option, do you think for the future there's a really good, footpath of Agile transformation that's still to occur in the next 10 years as well?
Carl, definitely. I think it's going to continue. It may not be called Agile transformation all the way through, but the agility, applying business agility to any organization, is something that's going to only get faster and more determined to succeed. I think there's massive opportunity for that element, and especially around the soft skills change management side of it.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, again, on behalf of myself and Michael, thank you very much for joining the podcast today. We wish you have very, very happy holidays moving forward as well. And we'll definitely have to get you back on board for our roundtables early in 2021 for Q1 to discuss this in much more detail as well.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks, Mike.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.